Hi, I'm Stephanie Shelton, and this is episode 37 of Conversations on Health, How We Get There. I'm calling this an emergency update on autism as we wait for the new causal studies authorized by Robert F. Kennedy, Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So far, according to a recent Reuters report, researchers have submitted more than 100 proposals for RFK Jr.'s $50 million study of autism's causes, essentially mining the CDC's large database. There's a separate review in progress on vaccine safety, as well as its relationship, if any, to autism. Secretary Kennedy originally made the unlikely promise to have the definitive findings by September, and that's, of course, this month, but has now stretched that much further out. Earlier this month, Kennedy appeared before the Senate Finance Committee for what evolved into a highly contentious hearing, mostly on vaccines, changes at the CDC, and autism. This is New Mexico's Democratic Senator Ben Ray Lujan on that $50 million autism study.
You don't even know what you're talking about.
Mr. Secretary, will you commit to sharing the protocols for the study by the end of the month?
We already have
You just said it's public.
We put out the notice of funding opportunities, and then the scientists from all over the world.
You're not understanding me. Let me
No,
speak
you're not
again.
understanding how the world works.
Do you understand what the protocols
Senator,
are? Do you understand what they are?
The scientists who are doing the studies submit the protocol.
Okay, so you
That's
know what
not coming from us.
So will you commit to sharing those protocols with this committee?
Well, anybody can get a hold of the protocol. It's published with the study.
You get the idea. So, I'm bringing back Dr. Amy Wetherby, one of the top U.S. autism experts, for this emergency update, to set you straight on the facts, the science, what we know now about autism's causes, which is quite a lot, and how early intervention can change an autistic child's life. Dr. Wetherby was my guest last June on episode 34, and I'll link to that much longer podcast so you can get more details. Amy is a distinguished research professor in the Department of Clinical Sciences and director of the Autism Institute in the College of Medicine at Florida State University. She's also a fellow of the American Speech Language Hearing Association, with over 45 years of clinical experience, and the executive director of the FSU Center for Autism and Related Disabilities. There's more in the show notes, along with links to several websites developed by Amy and her colleagues, which can provide a huge amount of help to the parents and teachers of autistic children. So, let's just jump right into our update, recorded a few days ago. Amy, thank you so much for coming back and doing this somewhat emergency update podcast.
It's a pleasure. Glad to be here.
So, can we just kind of start out with the basics about autism?
Yes.
So that all of us know what we know and what we don't know, basically. What do we know? Because I think it's quite a bit about the causes of autism.
Yes. So what we know about the causes of autism is that the primary cause or etiology is genetics. This has been studied for decades. And so what we know is that it can run in families. And we know this from studies, for example, of siblings. If one child has autism, the chance, the liability, the risk for another child to have autism is 20 to 25%.
Wow.
When you have identical twins, the chance of both of them having autism is 60 to 90%.
Wow.
And that's how we know it's genetic. So genes play a huge role as the primary risk. I think we now think about it as risk for, or risks for autism is a good way to think about it. The word liability is used, or risk for getting autism, having autism.
But just because you carry these genes does not necessarily mean that you're going to pass them on to your child, right?
Correct. And it's a polygenetic risk. So it's actually multiple genes. And I think of it like there's many different features or characteristics of autism, and each one may be associated with a set of genes. So language can be associated with a language gene.
Uh-huh.
The repetitive behaviors and restricted interests can be associated with a different set of genes. The social communication problem is a different set of genes. So it's multiple genes, and the gene now we have amazing genomics, the whole field of genomics, studying, with very fancy equipment that
Yeah.
can do the whole body genome and look at it in relationship to that helps for a lot of things and plays an important role. And we have not found an association with autism up to this point. There's not consistent evidence showing that Tylenol has a relationship to autism.
Can I
But
read to you and then ask you just to, to
yeah,
elaborate
yes.
on this? Dr. Alicia Holliday, the chief science officer at the Autism Science Foundation, put out a statement. And she says it is disingenuous and misleading to boil autism's causes down to one simple thing. There are hundreds of genes that are linked to autism. And while also there is thought to be other complex environmental factors, any association between acetaminophen and autism is based on limited, conflicting,
Mhm.
and inconsistent science and is premature given the current science.
Yes.
So that's already some of what you said. And then if you can just go on from there.
Yeah, and she's a highly regarded colleague. I know her, and Autism Science Foundation is an excellent source of information summarizing science. That's their middle name, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a great resource for everybody. So yeah, I completely agree with what she said. So the genetics is playing this big liability factor, right? Big risk factor. And then there's these others. So a couple other examples. One is older parents. Well, we've known for quite a while if the mother is older, meaning over 35 or older is considered older for moms, they have a higher risk of having a child with a developmental disability, like Down syndrome, also autism.
Mm.
But it hasn't been looked at as much in autism, but interestingly, older fathers are associated with autism and not so with other disabilities.
Mm.
So that's a risk factor. Again, it's increasing the risk. It may be a very small percentage or a portion of a percentage. So the gene is a big part, and then these other risks can add up and increase the risk further. And so older fathers is an example. Another one is fevers. This has been studied a little bit and found in association with neurodevelopmental disorders, not just autism, but that would include autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders. If a mom is running a fever when they're pregnant,
Which
what do
is
you
why
do?
you're told to take Tylenol, right?
And what do you do when you're running a
Yeah.
fever? Tylenol is the best medication
Yeah.
to take down a fever. So if having a fever is a bad thing when you're pregnant, potential, and again, it may be a very small percent of a risk. Taking Tylenol, which we don't know is a risk at this point, would be a good thing to do to reduce the fever. I mean, moms are not going to take Tylenol for no reason,
Yeah.
right? They're going to take it if they have a lot of pain. There's other medication they can take too, but then what are the risks of those medications?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's best to take no medications, but if you're running a fever, you want to bring your fever down. And again, this is just a small risk to increase. It's this combination of risk factors, genetic and environmental, that 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 lead to the end result, which is whether a child has autism or not. Now, there's another term which is called traits rather than risks or diagnostic features. And when we talk about autistic traits, those are characteristics that are similar to the diagnostic features that we all can have, or they can tend to cluster in families who have a higher genetic risk. So
Mm.
if a child has autism, it's more likely that their parent, one or both parents, has some of these traits that then mix, and then you end up with a child with autism because you have this combination. But the
And if
trait,
you have a trait for anything, not just autism, um, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything that's identifiable about you that's that different from the average child when you were young or adult. It's
exactly.
because it's not the whole. the whole picture.
Right. So we can think of a continuum of people from very, very social, very adept at lots of things, all the way out to autism, where you have significant social communication
Right.
diagnostic features. And then the traits are in between, and I know in my family, I've shared that my granddaughter has autism and my brother had a child with autism. It's in our family.
Mm,
Interesting, they're both girls, so I'm very interested in what they're going to find on female genes versus male genes. But
interesting.
my dad had a little characteristics and my mom had other characteristics. And so it's the combination of genetics that we're inheriting from both sides. And it is possible to have mutations, genetic mutations that lead to this. And the genetic mutations can run in families, they don't always. So there's a lot of the genetic risk that comes together. But if you just have a little bit, you have traits. And if you have a lot of the genetic risk, then you end up with a disorder. So what we do in the United States and internationally is we have diagnostic codes that draw a line. It's like a line in a meatloaf. We're going to cut a line in that meatloaf and we're going to put a joint in it. And we're going to say anything on the other side of that line meets the diagnostic features of autism. But below
Right.
that, you may have traits and you may do fine.
Yeah.
Once you get to that line and you're going to make a diagnosis of diagnostic features, it means it is impairing your everyday life. It's affecting your adaptive behavior and it's impairing your everyday life. If you have traits and it doesn't impair you, and actually they may be strengths,
Hmm.
and individuals with autism who have the disorder can also have many strengths.
Right.
My granddaughter has incredible memory skills. So they can have strengths as well, but it also impairs everyday life. So it's the impairment that goes along with the diagnosis of the features. If you just have traits, then that may be a strength for you and nothing to worry about.
So these are the things we know or we know enough to know we're going to know more about. What really don't we know? If you had a chance to do a paper
Yeah.
on autism and everything else that we
Yeah.
don't know, what would be the things you'd be looking
Yeah.
for?
And one, like I said, is the genetic, um, the genome, the genetic underlying genetic risk much broader than what we've identified to this point. So it includes individuals without cognitive delays, like my granddaughter, because she was identified early and got really early intervention. The other is so we're interested in the environmental interaction. I'm interested in the interaction of the genetic risk and other environmental risks with early intervention. Can we provide protective factors through early intervention that prevents the sequelae is the fancy word, the progression or trajectory or the child's ability, capacity to learn, because some of that is a result of the autism features.
Hmm.
And we talked about that previously. So
Right.
can we intervene? What can that do to the brain development, which the genes affect? And what can it do to the child's abilities? And what can it do to reduce the impact of the genetic risk or the environmental risk?
And anything else that you can think of?
Oh, I
I mean,
think
that's a
better.
lot, but
No. And all of these, I think studying the causes is one thing, but we really need to study interventions. And
intervention.
that's near and dear. Our research is on early detection. And when I say early, I mean in the first year of life, and then early intervention. And so rather than put effort into continuing to study the MMR vaccine, which there has been a lot of research to rule it out, and I've mentioned, the biggest research that's available to rule out the MMR is that our research and others show the features of autism are there in the first year of life well before you get the MMR. So it can't be the MMR. Let's put some time and money into research that's going to help us identify it earlier, identify the best intervention strategies, and making them available to all families to get started early and getting that message out. Because now it's let's wait and see, let's not worry about it. She's just a baby, or she's talking, so she can't have autism, which is not true, right? Let's get the help to families as early as possible. and then do the research on that.
Well, that seems to be as good a way to sum up what we do and don't know at the moment. I think it will be interesting to see what comes out of all these studies. Hopefully, some of them will go in the proper direction, and if there's bad science, it can be overcome that way.
And that's an important point you're making. Anything that we do, if we're using federal funding for research or any, private funding as well, it needs to be good science. And there are principles of good scientific methods. If you do a sample and the sample size is too small, you don't know much. If
Right.
you just simply look at a correlation between Tylenol and children that have autism, you know nothing about the cause of autism.
Yeah.
Because we learned this in middle school, right? Correlation does not imply causation.
Right.
So that isn't going to get us to the cause. So we need to have good science, both for genetics, for all other environmental factors, for treatment studies, for early detection studies, accuracy of screening tools, and so on. And we
And
know the
just,
metrics for good science.
yeah, I was going to say just very quickly for people um, who don't necessarily know what makes good
Mhm.
science.
Yeah,
This is not their area of expertise.
yeah,
What is good science?
yeah. Well, one is to try to use a randomized controlled trial. Now, there's some studies you really can't. But in treatment research and even in genetic research, samples could be randomly selected. Putting that randomization in is really important to make sure you don't have a biased sample. Even if you don't randomize, not having a biased sample. So if you're selecting children and they're all with very severe, children with autism, all with very severe cognitive level, those children are much easier to identify. In the CDC sample with a 1 in 31 prevalence, 75% have an IQ above 85, which would be within normal limits on up to gifted. So our samples of early detection have that very similar, they represent what we know is the full spectrum. The majority of them are higher cognitive level, and then about a third or 25% have the lower cognitive. Having a representative sample, because if you bias the sample, then you're going to come up with findings that aren't accurate. They're
Yeah.
only going to apply to the severe end. Now, sometimes you want to know about the severe end, and that's okay. Then you're doing a study. So there's studies on minimally verbal or those that are nonverbal. What do we know? And that's good. So separate the subgroups.
Right.
But the good science, your sample should not be biased. Your methodology should be replicable, and we should have replication studies. You need to provide enough detail. If you can randomize selecting or randomize assignments to group and have blindness, so like if the parents don't know, let's say you're studying the effect of food or diet, and the parents don't know what the child's eating, it's a far better study because the parents are going to have a bias and bring that to the outcome measures. So
And
trying
the
to
other
prevent
thing
bias.
excuse me, I think the other thing you mentioned was peer review
And
with
then once you've done the study, planned the study carefully, and conducted the study should go through a peer review process to get published. So we only should the solid science is if it's published in a journal that's peer reviewed. And there's a process for that. There's editors, and then you get invited. Scientists who know the field are invited to review, who are not don't have a conflict of interest,
Mhm.
and they review it. And you use multiple peer. Usually, you have three different people reviewing it, and if they disagree, then they'll get another reviewer. And so having that team of reviewers, and this is the same for grant funding, the peer review to select the best grant applications to do the research.
Mhm.
And then with publications, and they should be in journals, not magazines. No offense to magazines. Magazines
What's the
should,
difference? What's the difference?
okay, so the difference is the journals are peer, well, not all, but journals that are peer reviewed. Magazines are not peer reviewed. They have editors that put it out to sell to the public stories that are interesting to the public. That's great. And they should summarize the peer reviewed articles in magazines, right? But usually you're not going to report, the first line of reporting of a research study would not be in a magazine or on the internet. It would be through a peer-reviewed journal. Then the internet and the magazines should report on these peer-reviewed, solid science, good scientific methodology studies. This is how we have cured some cancer, like leukemia. Not full, but we are almost there with childhood leukemia. And what happened is that all children that were diagnosed with leukemia were put in a randomized trial. Here's what we know now, try this, compared to here's something new that we're going to add or do different. And they're randomly assigned. And so the parents don't know, and the parents agree to put their child in it. That is how we have learned to treat most childhood leukemia.
Wow.
And we've made a lot of science, breast cancer, compared to when my grandmother died of breast cancer in her 40s. We know so much now. And then the genetics of breast cancer, right? You add that in, and now we have personalized medicine, right? That shows that interaction of the kind of cancer that you have, the genotype, and then the treatment. So we know we need to bring that to autism research, right? That personalized, individualized scientific method.
Okay. I think that sets a stage for whatever we're going to get out of this from RFK Jr. and HHS
Yeah.
and the CDC, and who knows where
Yeah.
it's going to come from. But
Can I add one more, just one more
sure.
comment for families, especially if as soon as you or your doctor or somebody brings to your attention suspect that your child has autism, get going. You may end up on a long wait list to get a diagnosis, but if you suspect it, it is good to get going. And we have resources that you can get to on our Baby Navigator and Autism Navigator resources to get going now as soon as possible. And then you learn as you're doing the intervention, you learn more about, is this autism? If it's not autism, it's something else that needs intervention, right? And so get going as soon as you can.
Well, you just saved me writing the bridge to the part of the previous autism
Yeah,
podcast
right.
that I did with you,
Yeah,
because I'm going to add some of what you told me then onto
right,
this because I think it's
right,
so valuable.
right. Because the average age for diagnosis of autism in our country is between 4 and 5 years. And
Mhm.
yet we can make a diagnosis down to 18 months, and we're even heading towards 12 months or even earlier. Would you wait if it was cancer?
No,
Imagine
yeah,
waiting 2.5 or 3 years to diagnose cancer.
yeah, yeah,
Would be considered an epidemic, that would be considered wrong.
yeah,
Why is it not for autism?
yeah. All
So
right. So thank you. And I will be moving on, like I said, to the end of the old podcast so we can get
great.
more about the intervention in.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's so important.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming back again,
Yeah,
Amy. And on to the older part of the podcast as we've been talking about. I am childless by choice, and I think that it must be an incredibly exciting, but also an incredibly frightening experience to be, especially a new parent.
yeah,
You know, there's so
absolutely.
much that's unknown out there.
But the early environment can have an incredible impact on children's outcomes. So the time that you can impact a child's development are in the first 1,000 days of life. And that's from
Oh,
conception. That's from conception. So that includes pregnancy, because it's taking care of yourself when you're pregnant, everything you can to have that healthy environment in utero. And then the first 2 years of life. So it's until 24 months of age. That's when the brain is developing the most rapidly. And that means the environment has the greatest impact on the child's brain and their abilities, which are based on brain development. Now, neither of my children, they've been tested. We volunteered them for all sorts of testing. Neither of my children had autism, but my granddaughter ends up having autism. And I noticed the features in the first, well, it really by 6 months. Now, children with autism, when they're first born, can be very social and interactive. So she looked at faces, she smiled, but around 6 months, things started changing that I recognized as an expert. I knew what to look for. And I could see she would clench her hands, posture her fingers and arms a little bit unusual. She slowed down at looking at faces. By 9 months, She rarely looked at faces. And so I saw this unfolding, and that is the usual pattern. Some children will start unfolding at 2 months, at 4 months, at 6 months, maybe at 9 months. But usually in that first 9 months, if you know what to look for, it's unfolding. And so at 9 months, I kept inviting my daughter to a project that we had called Baby Navigator. So we developed Baby Navigator, which is used globally. It's a website and a mobile app, the web app and a mobile app that you can join, that parents can join. Only parents or legal guardians can join. Anybody can go and get a lot of information from it on the public website. Parents can actually register and join and sign up. It's free. And then we offer our social communication growth chart. So we help you monitor your baby's development of social communication and language from every 2 months, from 2 months to 24 months. So we can catch delays if they're coming in. We also have a screening tool that we developed to screen for communication delay and autism.
Mm-hmm.
And so we start screening at 9 months. We then did the full evaluation. But the important part is we have a treatment to get started. So we have a treatment that we've been developing for about 2 decades, and we've been polishing it and going younger and younger. And now our research is focused on 9 to 12-month-olds. And what so amazed me, because I got to watch this from the beginning, and of course we have video clips along the way, is how much change rapidly that you can get when you start really young. So most of our research had been starting at 18 months. And we had published a study a couple of years ago showing if you start at 18 months, children's outcomes are better than if you wait 9 months and start at 27 months. So this is going now, what we're focusing on is showing how much more you can gain by starting younger. And it's all about brain development and the impact.
I mean, and that's really true about everything with children.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you
learning.
start shaping them from the very beginning in these areas, then they move out to blossom.
Yes.
I mean, even the verbal, the difference between parents who talk to their children immediately in adult form and parents who either don't talk to them or talk to them baby talk. I mean, I read those studies years and years ago. You know, and it is. I met your granddaughter briefly in our little Zoom when we did a pre-interview, and she looked directly into the camera, and she looked to me on the outside, meeting her for the first time like a normal kid.
Yeah, it would appear that way, and the gains that she made were tremendous. She learned to talk by 24 months she was talking, whereas most of when we started 18 months, by 36 months they're talking. So she kind of had that year edge because we started so young. And she learned how to interact first with her family. And then we very systematically, I was able to guide my daughter, and my daughter embraced. She got coached by one of my master coaches in our research study. And my granddaughter made tremendous progress learning her gestures, how to use a variety of objects, and expanded her cognitive skills. And she was delayed in motor by 36 months, fairly caught up on motor. And then now she's 5, and all of her skills are above average.
Wow.
Her motor, I think, is right around average or slightly above, but her verbal is now above average.
That's
but
amazing.
She still has autism. You may not notice it unless you spend a bit of time with her, but we notice it on a daily basis. So it's not that the autism's gone, it's that she has verbal abilities to negotiate. Her mom and the family now and her teachers have now the skills to support her learning. So she's just learning and thriving and loves learning and is so inquisitive.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
But still
I looked at some of the videos on the Baby Navigator site, and because you showed different children in the same situations, and you could actually see the difference. It wasn't just reading words, you know. I thought it was quite compelling. I will include links, incidentally, to Baby Navigator, and you have another website also.
It's called Autism Navigator.
Right.
Yeah.
So those will all be on the show notes, so they'll be right there for you.
That would be great because really our unique niche in the field is the video. I've always been kind of a little tech nerd and love videoing. And so we always videoed everything as families come in. We video from the beginning and then as their child progresses. And so then I go back to the families and ask their permission. They're not obligated. Ask their permission. Would it be okay if we use these videos? And we edit them and show them exactly what we're going to use to train others, to teach the world what does autism look like, particularly really young. So we developed, it's been since 2007 was our first online ASD video glossary that we launched. And then we got funding from the state of Florida and built Autism Navigator. So we have a whole collection of courses for families, for professionals, on not only what is autism and what it looks like early, but how to provide the evidence-based early intervention, classroom-based, evidence-based classroom education. And then we develop Baby Navigator to really, which is for all families, where we have lots of typically developing children to show you what babies are learning from month to month, because most parents don't know.
No.
My daughter wasn't thinking about it or aware. So you don't see these little delays that are there that we can catch before those delays get bigger and bigger.
Now you have the facts on autism that top researchers like Amy currently work with. Maybe the data mining HHS Secretary Kennedy is authorizing will provide additional clarity. Maybe not. But if you're armed with the scientific facts, you won't be taken in by pseudoscience, wherever it originates. Dr. Amy Wetherby is a distinguished research professor in the Department of Clinical Sciences and director of the Autism Institute in the College of Medicine at Florida State University. She's also a fellow of the American Speech-Language Hearing Association with over 45 years of clinical experience and the executive director of the FSU Center for Autism and Related Disabilities. There are links in the show notes to the Autism Navigator and Baby Navigator websites. If you think you have an autistic child or know someone who needs information and help, or if you're pregnant right now, take a good look at these websites and check out our earlier podcast, episode 34, on autism. As I record this, I'm still working on the October podcast, so check the show notes on my website, which I'll update as soon as possible. Episode 38 will drop on the third Tuesday of October, since I schedule one new podcast episode a month. And as always, please subscribe and share. The video versions on YouTube, audio on Apple, and on all the other major platforms, including my host platform, the Podbean website and app. Show notes and links on my website, stephanieshelton.com/conversations. I'm Stephanie Shelton. Take care of yourself and all those you love, and I'll see you next time. Conversations on Health, How We Get There is produced and edited by Frank Harold. Research assistance from Dr. Richard Saltman, Professor Emeritus of Health Policy and Management, Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University in Atlanta.